So, good morning, or is it good evening? Oh, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another session of our coffee talks. That's right, we are in Europe. We have some fantastic youth, and obviously our beautiful Elizabeth, who will tell you where she is. But may I say, it's a lovely platform to be in. We are 2 years into doing this. It was the first lockdown. So we've made it around the globe because the first one was in Europe. Let's see what happens next. But may I introduce myself? So I'm Alka Patel, here based in London. I'm a heartfulness trainer and I'm also a teacher. Welcome, are you?
Well, hello, I'm Tom. I'm 27, based in Bristol. I'm a very recent practitioner of heartfulness. Only really joined late last year, 2021. But it's been an interesting experience. It's been lovely meeting all the new people. So I'm a chef at the moment. Quite recent to that too, and I should be traveling. Well, I am traveling in June. I'm going to the USA to teach some cookery around summer camps in the US.
That's really cool. I think it's amazing that you're a chef. So my name is Aline Nicolai, Aline Shraddha. I have an Indian name because I was born and raised in the south of India. So I've been in France for 2 years now. My parents are French originally, and I've come back here to do my studies. So I've just finished my master's in international business management. And right now I'm doing an internship in human resources. So yeah, I really love languages and traveling. So COVID's been a bit tough. I envy you, Tom, for going to the US now, because right now I'm stuck in my internship in France. It's fun, but I hope I can travel again soon.
Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth and I've known Aline since before she was born. So this is a really nice reunion, and we used to live opposite each other in Chennai. So we saw a lot of each other back then. Not so much more recently, but we share a birthday, so it's great to catch up. So I'm Australian, but for the moment I'm based in Kanashantivanam, the Heartfulness headquarters in India, near Hyderabad. It's very hot, although it's starting to cool down now. And I'm a heartfulness trainer. I'm also the editor of the magazine, which we're going to talk about today, and various other things. But let's just jump into it, I think, this stage.
Fantastic. So, yes, Elizabeth, again, these lovely youth have picked a wonderful article. Absolutely. It actually took me back. I had to read it. And okay, I see where the author of this particular article is coming from. So, points of intersection. Could have the next slide. Now, a gentleman called Animesh Anand, he explores the nature of cultural differences, how we perceive them, how we transcend them, how a meditative mind can perceive from a deeper level, avoiding prejudice and bias, which in return leads to a unity amidst the diversity. Guys, it's an amazing article. So let's have the first quote. Who resonated with this one?
Me. I chose this one, so I'll just read it out. Meditation helps us see that it's always easier to see the separators than the integrators. They're more frequent, more prominent, and more fact-based, something our minds gather quick. Integrators happen when the mind's done its work and the heart operates. I really like this quote. I think I experience this on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if you have this, but I have moods where I go out and I'm like really happy. Anything that happens, I'm just like, oh, that's great. There's a person doing music on the street. I'm just really pumped about anything that I see. And then there are other days when my mood is just, I'm really crabby and someone can just walk by me with, I don't know, music that's too loud and I'm just like insulting them in my mind. And I think that that's a little bit of that separation. And it's actually a switch that I've become able to do consciously. So yesterday, for example, I was coming back from taking groceries and I have to take the bus for that. The person in front of me was on the phone really loud, really long. And I was just like, oh, can they stop it? Why are they doing this? And after I think a good 5 minutes of that, I thought myself, why am I making myself unhappy? You know, this isn't what I'm making myself unhappy, not this other person. And so mentally I was like, find one good thing about the person. And then once you do that switch, I think that's what the quote talks about. You switch into the heart and you just start finding everything happy again, you know? And that's something that I think I've found quite useful in everyday life, to like decide myself when I want to create that integrator factor. I don't know, Tom, if you resonate with any of that.
No, I felt that a lot. It's the way I saw what I felt about the quote is I often feel like meditating sort of removes a lot of the impressions that we get throughout the day, sort of our conscious impressions and our subconscious. But so it's like however open-minded we want to be, we've always got certain ways of looking at the world, normally brought up through what sort of culture we were brought up in. So it's people are becoming a lot more conscious about it these days. There's because there's a Western way of looking at the world, or you could even put it down to smaller factions, like an English way of looking at the world, or these are broad overviews, but there is some truth in it. But once you remove all these sort of impressions of conscious ways of looking at the world, let the heart take over. That's where everyone sort of views life the same, once you have that sort of heartful empathy with people.
Yeah, I relate to that. I think what happens is that, you know, if you think about the way we go around in the world, just biologically, instinctively, we're always sort of on this alert for danger. I mean, we're wired that way. We can't help it. And so it's like you were saying, Aline, you see somebody on the bus with a phone and automatically your prickles go up, because it's like, hold on a second, this is not good. This is not harmonious. Even though it's not a threat per se, it's something that the mind goes into, hold on a second, this is a negative. And it's, unless we do something to regulate it, it's just chronic. And it can be, you know, you see a drunk homeless person on the street and automatically you go into negative mode of, oh, let me protect myself. And that comes out, instead of let me protect myself biologically, it's like, look at that person. And, you know, maybe a lovely human being who's just going through a hard time, but there's a judgment in the way we look at things. And we don't take the time to pause, to go back and say, now, is this really dangerous? Do I really have to defend myself here? And if so, yes, go somewhere else. But most of the time it's not. It's just some prejudice or something that's put a separator in our mind. This person's different from me in some way. And so then, of course, there's a separation. And I've found too that with meditating that I can pause better. You know, I've got that poise in my being that I can stop and say, hold on a second, what's going on inside me? Why is there this agitation or this irritation or this sort of need to point a finger or, you know, whatever it is? And the minute I do that, like you said, it just stops, it switches straight away. Suddenly it's like, hold on a second, this is not a dangerous situation. I'm okay here. Let me just carry on with the day and be happy. So yeah, I think it's and it really is meditation that helps with that. Plus, I think for us, the heartfulness cleaning, because it gets rid of all those, you know, those sort of strong viewpoints and attitudes that are just, otherwise we just think they're normal. They're not normal. It's like you said, Tom, they're English or they're Western or they're, you know, they're Bristol or they're Australian or whatever they are, but they're just conditioning.
You know, Absolutely. Everything you've all said, which reminds me, do we then have these thoughts already from in our mind of when we're judging, because that's what came through, when we're judging people, is it that we don't know enough about their culture? Or is it? Because this article, he talks about unity, doesn't he? He says that we have all these ideals about what people are like, especially here in London. We've got a mixed community. I'll tell you, when I was your age, Aline, and I'm on the underground, I used to love people watching, and honestly, I would be judging them. It was just wonder where they came, wonder what he does, all these kind of things. But as Elizabeth says, years now of practicing heartfulness, naturally that's gone. I sometimes wonder, why am I not doing what I used to do? I still ask that question, why am I not being biased or judgmental? I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I've seen the shift. Anyway, let's move on to the next quote. Oh, is that you, Tom?
Yes, that was me. Yes, this is an interesting quote. An intersection common to all societies, the realization that we're all born, each of us have a desire to live a peaceful life. It's an interesting, once you remove all the conditions in life or prejudices, we do generally all have a lot more in common than we have differences, but it's a lot easier to go to the differences first, because sometimes they can seem so much more obvious, but really they're not. We have a lot more in common all across even our own societies, rather than as societies, like between men and women, and we've got a lot more common than we've got differences, really. And so I always find the more I meditate, the quicker it's like you said, Elizabeth, earlier, the quicker it is and easier it is for me to remove my initial judgments, and just remember that we are all really going after the same goal.
I agree. I think there's a sort of categorization that we do. We compartmentalize things that we observe in everyday life to try and make sense of it. And that's a very mental state of being. And it's a way of rationalizing, which only takes you so far in your interactions with people. And I think that we can do that. That's something that we do just naturally, but we need to take it a step further. And like the quote ends with, the intersection of love. And that's what we've been referring to as this meditation, this sort of heartful connection and realization that everyone sort of leads the same life in a sense. Everyone has goals in a way. There's a word for this. I can't remember what it is, but it's when you have a sudden realization that unknown passerbys, they all lead their own lives with their own goals, with their own families. And that's it's funny that there's a word for that, because it means that people realize that sometimes, and it sort of takes you out of yourself and gives you a global perspective. And suddenly you're like, we're all different, sure, but we're all the same in the larger sense of it. And I think that there's a certain separation of yourself that you need to have in order to get to that point all the time and not have it be a sudden realization. And I think that's where practicing meditation and centering yourself really helps.
Yeah. I remember one of the things Charity used to say when I first started Heartfulness way back, and he made this amazing comment, which just made me laugh so much. He said, when you go to the dentist, does the dentist ask you if you've got Christian teeth or Hindu teeth? No. The teeth, right? The heart's the heart. And it's the same concept, this idea that, like you say, we're all struggling with the same stuff. But even more than that, one of the things I love about human beings is that no matter where anyone's at, no matter where any of us are at, we're all doing our best in that moment. we may intersect in funny ways, like something that I do may hurt another person without me meaning to, but I'm still doing my best. I'm not going around trying to make their lives miserable, or, it's not like our differences are intended to hurt, not at all. Our differences are just like, flowers in the garden. One's yellow, one's red, one's got thorns, one's got beautiful fragrance. I mean, everything's different. And we wouldn't want it otherwise, because imagine how boring it would be if we were all the same. In fact, one of the hilarious things about working with your mother, Aline, is that the two of us would often have very similar opinions about things. And so when we were working on a project, we'd always have to bring in somebody else to have a different point of view, because otherwise it was just too homogeneous. And I really find that if we're going to really get to this point with humanity where we overcome all this stupid polarization and all the lack of harmony or lack of collaboration, lack of cooperation that we see, we've got to somehow get to be able to laugh at the fact that, the differences are beautiful somehow. The differences amongst us are heaven sent for us to appreciate different ways of looking at the world. And I think it's something that comes with age, when you let go of your principles and your ideals enough that you're not wedded to them. You can see that somebody else may have some different viewpoint, etc. But I just find a lot of hope in all that, because I think we struggle with our problems. We all have the same loneliness, the same insecurities, the same lack of confidence at times, the same feeling disappointed or whatever. But we also have the same highs. We also have the same joys and appreciations and gratitudes. And we often focus on the negatives, but I think the positives are just as much there.
Absolutely. Whilst you guys were talking, Elizabeth, I thought the only way I could explain how I understood this is when I was growing up in London back in the 80s, when I was very young, I would say, this word racism, it was quite powerful. It was right in front of me. I was growing up in an area predominantly there wasn't any, Asians or Indians, and so I felt at the time I was on the other side of it, getting that hurt and for my culture or my my race. Today I'm a teacher, and I wanted to share this because I've got a class of all cultures, from Africa to Eastern Europe and from China, all in one class, United Kingdom, all in one class. And when I look at the way they are with each other, it makes me understand even more and more what unity is, because they don't have those barriers. I don't know why. Yeah, Tom's nodding. I don't know why adults have to have this so much. Go on, Tom. I feel like you want to add on.
Well, no, it just makes you wonder what sort of age these prejudices, or maybe prejudice is too strong a word, but there definitely is an age in your life where you do start categorizing a bit too soon, or I suppose when you start needing to have a worldview, maybe your worldview is not quite complex enough to really see the more nuanced personalities in different people. It changes a lot in the way people are brought up, and how early I suppose they're exposed to other cultures. It's interesting. It's lovely to see the kids that age where they just don't really have any of those prejudices yet.
Yeah.
Shall we have the next quote? I think. Yeah. So I'll quickly go through this one. After we are done trying to fit another into our pattern of identification, and in the worst case failed, we let the heart take over. I can surely tell you that is the way, the only way, because like I said earlier, from where I've come from where I am, sometimes in anger, the mind does take over. But the reactions, I'm just going again with, I feel my class are my learning, it's my learning ground. I'm the learner. And I can see the shift in when I am doing one thing from the mind to another from the heart. The result, that's what I mean, the result is definitely different. What do you think, Aline?
I think what stuck out for me in this quote is fitting into a pattern of identification, because that's something that I think I've struggled with, fitting myself into a certain pattern. Because I don't know, growing up, product of French parents, but completely in an Indian community. I went to an Indian school that was later international, but I started out really in a community that was only from the south of India. And I looked nothing like the kids I played with, but that was never something that really bothered me as I was young. And I think that's similar to what you were saying. At what age does that threshold get crossed? And after a while, I never knew. At one point, I really hung on to my European roots, and I was really proud of knowing things about France that my friends didn't know. I think this was more in my teenage years, because for me, at that point, my way of identifying myself was as a European, but I'm not really. Now that I'm in France, I really relate much less to the people here than I thought I would. And at the same time, I'm not completely Indian. So it's a very weird middle ground that I feel a lot of youngsters nowadays find themselves in, because there's a lot of moving around. We go into different countries. We have parents that are of mixed identities. And this idea of pattern identification has become a lot more difficult to really nail down. I think a lot of people have issues with defining their identity that can actually last a long time if you don't sort of accept yourself, just whoever you are. You don't need to find words for it. You just, this is me. It's fine if no one else has had this experience. That's what makes me unique, and it's all right. And I think it took me a long time to get to that point. I had quite a few moments of low self-esteem, issues with how I presented myself, and it was not that easy. And I think meditation helped a lot. Just I understand who I am on the inside, and so that should be enough. Whatever I present outside is just a reflection of that, and I let people interpret it how they want.
Tom?
Well, it's an interesting way of looking at it, putting this quote towards yourself rather than other people. I sort of had the opposite problem to you growing up. I grew up in the south of England, and it's like most of the people looked exactly like me. Like 98% of people, had the same sort of upbringing, same sort of class, and I find sometimes that it doesn't make it harder to find your own identity in a way, because you can relate to so many people have similar experiences. But there's sort of I used to wonder what was my own identity, my own personal identity, or was this the identity of just the people surrounding me, because we all had such similar upbringings. So it actually took me quite a few years, and even before I started meditation, it's trying to really look inside myself and sort of try and remove as many of my mental conscious prejudices about myself, and trying to let the heart take over, trying to see what was really inside me, what made me different from anyone else, what made my personality my own. And I find sometimes people who grew up in cultures, or maybe not cultures, but where the backgrounds are so different to people they grow up with, they can sort of identify with their background or cultures of their parents a little bit more. You can definitely see with expats living away from Europe who used to live in England. They can be the most English people of the lot or identify so much with the culture, which a lot of people who grew up here don't really identify with anymore. It's an interesting quote.
Yeah, I also found it fascinating, that it's about our identification, right? So what's our identification? And this I've been really reflecting on a lot of late, because it's our ego, what we identify with. What's identifying? It's the ego that's identifying. So whether that's a culture, whether it's a language, whether it's a generation, whether it's a group like, heartfulness practitioners, whether it's, that I'm from the south of England or I'm from Australia or whatever. These are all ego identifications. And what I've discovered over the years is that the more tight my identification with a particular group or description or whatever, the easier I am hurt when it's challenged. So the minute I'm able to let go and expand that identification, then the easier it is for me to be able to accept everything. So the minute I can identify with being human as opposed to being female or being white or being whatever it is, the easier it is for me to then be able to embrace and include everybody and not get defensive about my own role. And, this plays out on all sorts of levels. And when you were talking about as kids, how kids don't see this, I looked at my kids when they were growing up in very multicultural Australia, and they were just all Aussies, no matter what colour their skin or what their background or what food they ate, whether they were eating Polish food or Sikh food or Hong Kong Chinese food, didn't matter. They were all Aussies because that's how they identified as friends. And so this role of the ego is so critical into how we respond to this. And of course, it's one of the things that happens with heartfulness is that gradually over time, you're letting go of more and more and more of these identifications, including like your principles, what you hold dear. If I believe in justice or kindness or something like that, then it's very easy for me to ostracize a person who is unjust or unkind. But the minute I say, okay, yes, I can see that it's important, but I'm going to let go of this principle and accept people for who they are, it changes everything. And my experience is that meditation really helps with this over time. Because you see these identifications like this in your face in meditation. And you can sort of go, oops, okay, that hurt, that pricked my ego. So let me look at what that means. What am I identifying with? That I get pricked by this. And it's a fascinating self-study, I've found.
No, absolutely. I was just thinking, Elizabeth, it doesn't help when we have all these documents we have to sign in, and what category do you come under? It's that outside, I say outside world, but when you do practice heartfulness meditation over years and years and years, I have definitely found that shift. No longer saying who's what, when, and why, and who's doing what, and who's eating what, like you said, who's speaking what. You start feeling from that deeper layer that we are one, but society is not allowing it, and that's probably what the youngsters are facing as a I don't know, when you go to another country, maybe. Well, I was going to ask you this, Tom, and I know, Aline, you haven't travelled for a bit, but when you are travelling, do you find the youth, I'm not talking about adults now, and I'm not talking about little children, the youth out there, do they see you as one? What's your experience? Tom, recently you've travelled a bit, haven't you?
Yes, it's only been really Central Europe I've travelled recently, so it hasn't been too much of a culture shift. It's interesting. Generally, people sort of our age have has really changed the last few decades. I mean, obviously, as societies, we haven't overcome racism or anything, but we've become so much more conscious of even unconscious biases or prejudices that we all have as much as all have traces of everyone. But we've become a lot more conscious about it as a society. But sometimes I wonder if in the past few years, it's like what you're on about, the checklist of have to tick off your identity every time you have to make a new login or anything. If it's being more and more conscious of how much your upbringing or background plays a role in your life. Is this a healthier way of looking at things, or is it more divisive, or I always felt that putting yourself as a human or your own personality first is much more important than one's own racial identity or sexual identity or gender roles.
Yeah.
But then again, I haven't really had to growing up as a white male in southern England. I haven't really faced nearly as many problems as other people.
Yeah, but Tom, have you noticed that list is growing and growing? The labels, these identifications are growing and growing. Or I honestly cannot keep up. I have to ask my own children, what does that mean and what's going on? It's not me being ignorant. It's just I don't want it to grow. I want us. It should be going back to we are all the same. That kind of thing. Aline, do you want to add anything to that one, or should we move on?
I mean, I think about the list growing. I think it's people searching for themselves more and more, and we sort of need a community around us in order to really be able to talk to people who have similar experiences, so that because you can, if you don't have the tools to look in yourself, it's always helpful, even when you have those tools, to have a community around you that can help you reflect, bounce off ideas, and let them tell you what they've been through, so you can learn from that as well. I know that when you start, for example, heartfulness meditation, it's great to meditate on your own, but it's amazing to connect with, for example, connecting with you, this conversation. This is a community. This is, in a sense, a way of identifying, and it is something that helps a whole lot. And I feel like we're all looking for that, like everyone in today's society, looking for people that we can connect with based on some sort of core fundamental thing to ourselves that we would like other people to have as well. And it comes in different ways. I think it's different ways of finding people that are in tune with themselves. So when we talk about, for example, sexuality or gender identification, those are all things that people find fundamental to themselves, and therefore they want someone else to find. For me, if I want to find someone who is very centered on the heart and all that, I will look in the heartfulness community, for example, to have a conversation, because that's something that I find very fundamental to myself. And I think that these communities aren't necessarily a bad thing, the fact that there are so many of them and that it's growing more and more. But we can go to the next quote.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a nice way of putting it. That's why I like speaking to youngsters. You're right, because if they're not settled in the mind, how can they work with the heart? That's what message that's what I got from what you said. Shall we have the next slide? Elizabeth, can we invite you?
Yeah, looking at things with a contemplative mind helps you expand your consciousness, your sense of awareness of the things around you and your own self. I would definitely agree with this. It's about just having that ability. When your mind is contemplative, you can pause, you can stop more easily and just explore something. It could be something like this. For example, this whole idea of identification. Is it a good or is it a bad thing that we have more labels? It goes both ways. I think I think it can be very healthy when people accept diversity, when there's a lot of tolerance, when there's a lot of understanding in society. when you get very polarized societies where people judge each other for being different, it can have a very negative connotation. I don't think I can really put a positive or negative spin on that, because when I stop and I contemplate on that, I can't imagine what it must have been like, for example, for an Afro-American in the 1930s, growing up in the South. I can't say, let go of all these identifications, because when you live in that environment, how can you judge? So I think, again, it's about when you expand your awareness, your consciousness, what happens? You stop judging the whole thing and you say, all right, let's just accept where everybody's at right now. Let's accept where I'm at. So it's like you said, Aline, sometimes when you go out and you may feel wonderful and you may look at the world and your world is sunshine, right? You're so joyous. You might have had a good meditation, a wonderful discussion with somebody, and you feel positive and full of the joys. On another day where something's irritating you or something's coming up that's difficult to deal with, the world looks like a different place because our consciousness has changed. It's darker, it's sadder, it may be filled with grief about something that's happened. I don't think we try and stop any of that. I mean, that's life, that's living, and it's about accepting, it's about being aware of it, being able to have the tools to know how to manage that better so it doesn't get out of hand. If somebody's hurt me, what do? Do I wallow in it? Do I want to get back at them? Or do I have tools to remove that energetic charge so that I can deal with it in a much better way? I think that's what it's all about. The contemplative mind gives you that incredible ability to stop and go, you know what? This person's doing the best they can. Let me remove any heaviness from my system. Let me not hold it. Let me not intensify it and make it worse by having my own reaction back. Let me send loving thoughts to that person, and let me figure out what I can do to deal with myself in a more compassionate way as well if I'm hurting. So definitely that maturity comes when you have a contemplative mind. It just changes your ability to cope with the ups and downs.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, when I read this, initially I thought contemplative mind. And then I just wanted to ask the youth and sort of share with the audience, when we say contemplative mind, people go, the mind. But there is also we call it the heart consciousness, the heart mind. Tom, would you want to share any experiences? Sorry, I put you on the spot, where you were all mind and you realize at that moment, what am I doing? Is there anything you could share with our audience? The difference between working from here and working from...
No, I suppose that's really part of the reason I joined Heartfulness. I've always been, actually that's not true, I haven't always been interested in spirituality. It's sometimes I've been all mind and no heart really. It's sometimes I think it's I grew up in sort of Church of England religious worldview, which I identified a lot as a child, but I lost my faith around my teenage years, and a lot of people do, and it's sometimes it's not always an unhealthy thing. Sometimes you have to go through losing something to re-find it again, and I suppose since I'm so new, I'm still searching. But so yeah, after I lost my faith, I was I had a very contemplative, conscious mind. I was always very good at viewing things from just about everyone's worldview, or as best I can. I can always see things from different perspectives, which is healthy, but it has sort of hindered me finding my own personality, or finding what I really believe, rather than just what the last opinion I heard was. So yeah, before I joined Heartfulness, I was really conscious of the fact that I'd lost the connection with my heart. I was all brain and just thinking without any connection to my my spirits. And ever since joining, I've still got a long way to go, but I'm really getting a lot closer to finding my spirit again, I suppose.
I mean, that is fantastic. That's great sharing. You're absolutely right. I think when I look at my teenagers, so they weren't brought up religiously like I was, but they're born into, well, my son's been born into Sahajwag, the Heartfulness way, and the girls are practicing. But they're kind of dipping in and out, and I see that in me when I was being brought up in a religious environment. So, Aline, I want to, because I know your mom's going to watch this, share.
About growing up in, yeah, I think it's complicated because a lot of the people that I grew up with also had parents who were meditating, who were following the Heartfulness path. And a lot of them in an Indian context followed suit, because I feel like in that context, it's a lot easier to talk about faith, spirituality, and going into another layer of sort of the self, the heart, sometimes a higher power, and all of that is just much easier to talk about. Whereas in France, in Europe, there's a sort of blockage that's been created because of a big focus on religion in the past, and people have gone in the opposite direction where they don't want to talk about anything that's to do with that. They've become very mentally focused, and there's a loss of that connection to the heart. And so a lot of the people that I grew up in India had no problem following kind of in the footsteps of their parents, but this was something they were very comfortable with having as a lifestyle. And I have friends whose parents were also like longtime practicants of meditation that grew up in France, and it was just such a different worldview from what they were used to, from what their friends were experiencing, that it was hard to tie in the two of them. And I think that that's something that I've sort of seen in myself as well as I switched from, so I did my university in India for my bachelor's, and now I've done my master's in Europe. And it's been a huge switch in the amount of practice that I do. I dropped out of it for a long time. And right now I'm still not back into it 100% as I was when I was back in India. And I just feel like it's very hard to tie in the two ways of living life. And I've talked to a lot of young people who are trying meditation or trying different types of spirituality. And there's a real disconnect with how the youth live their lives nowadays. That it becomes kind of a challenge to tie in the two. And that's just something that I think ties back to what we were saying, and that, well, you don't need to really identify, you just feel, and however you're feeling is, that's where you're at the moment, and that's fine. And I think that there's this rationalization that we try to do, and that's where we get confused and stressed out, and that's where we need to take a step back and look at the heart.
Wow, what a journey, Aline. You really have been thrown in one deep end to the other. Yeah, wow. Elizabeth.
Well, I had almost the opposite. I mean, I grew up in a very atheistic family in Australia at a time when Australia was also not a religious culture. Well, on the surface, yes, but not in reality. Although I would say both my parents were highly spiritual, but they didn't identify with that because of the religion and the problems that the religion had caused during that time, including, abusive behavior towards children, beating children, and all the pedophilia and everything else that was part of growing up in that. So I grew up searching, but with a very wide breadth to it. Like, I was reading the Bhagavad Gita when I was a teenager, and Buddhist scriptures and Sufi tales, and I'd grown up with a Christian tradition, which I appreciated much more after I started Heartfulness, I must say. And I came to it from an experiential point of view because I was very good at science. I love science. I love nature. So I came to it through music, through nature, through other things. And then when I meditated, the first experience, it was like, this is it, because of the experience. So I think we can come from any approach. And I think the journey is an individual one. It can never be dogmatic. If you just do it because your parents have done it and it's not you, that doesn't make any sense. If you rebel against your parents, but you love it, eventually you'll come back to it. I think the heart is going to guide you no matter which place you start from. And everyone will start from a different place. And it doesn't matter, because when you come to a certain point, it's all part of the same dynamic of lives upon lives anyway. And so whether you're sitting in Bristol or whether you're in Chennai or whether you're in Australia or wherever you are, doesn't matter. Whatever your background, doesn't matter, because all of it's conspiring to bring you to one central understanding, which is this instinctive drive that there's something more. And at some point, the human soul craves to understand that something more, to experience that something more. And it's beautiful when the thing I love sometimes is listening to everyone's stories of how they came upon their journey, whatever that is. Sometimes it's in heartfulness, sometimes it's in Buddhism, sometimes it's a Sufi journey, or it can be anything. But there's always this commonality again, this understanding that there's a depth to my being which is beyond the everyday world that I live in. And somehow we learn to explore that. And something pulls us, like a fishing line almost, pulls us towards that in ways that when you look back make sense. But at the time, it just happens to you.
Elizabeth, when you talk like that, it just brings back all the memories, guys, when I first started. So I came across the Hedgemark, which is the Sanskrit name for Heartfulness Way, the natural path. And it was when I was living in Dubai. And that's when I was at the height of this as a businesswoman. And I just remember meeting a trainer at the time. It was just somebody who was living near us. And she was like, try it. I was like, yeah. Constantly, I'm making appointments to have a sitting. And I would last minute, can't make it. But she was pulling me and pulling me and pulling me. But I remember now these, after years and years of practicing, when I moved back to London, I went to one of these religious functions, which I grew up in, of the community here. And I just remember going straight into meditation. So they were singing, because it's a very, like, they do the old singing to the idols. And I just remember going into meditation. And that's when I concretely said, this is what it's about. It's not about what's happening externally. It's what's happening inside me. And that's what reinforced it for me. So, guys, just looking at time, there are a few messages I feel that you could still share with our audience. Going back to the article and the sharing that we've been doing, what's one of the biggest, I don't know, intake you've taken from the article or from the practice of heartfulness? Is there anything you want to share with our audience? Tom?
Well, I suppose the biggest thing I've taken from the article is once you remove your conscious impressions and conscious prejudices, I suppose my simple way of putting it is you find out you've got a lot more in common than you've got differences between people. And not even people, just talking about there is the idea of spirituality and religion. I think there's a lot of truth to it's about all the religions, really, all the spiritual practices. When you really think about it and meditate on it, there's a lot more in common than they have differences, really. They've got so many of the identical sort of goals and aims in life, which it's really strange to think about it when they all independently came about thousands of years ago. So that really helped me sort of. I'm still trying to find what exactly I believe in, what exactly where my faith lies. But I used to be very nihilistic after I left the church, and really did have see too much purpose in life. But after meditating on it, I found out that I never really left my faith, or whatever spirituality feeling of the divine that I used to be able to pick up so easily as a child was still there, and sort of realized that as I started practicing heartfulness.
You know, Tom, that reminds me of when I first started. I've read lots and lots of books, and one of the biggest statement I remember, and I know it's a very simple one, in Babaji Maharaj, which he is one of our previous global trainers. Yeah, he said, "Where religion ends, spirituality starts." Elizabeth, would you like to add more?
Yeah, and it's actually that spirituality transcends religion. It's not that religion ends, but that somehow you go into the experiential part of it. And so what you might learn as a kid, or you might grow up, you know, in a Christian tradition or in any other tradition for that matter, then what happens, of course, is your faith deepens because you have experience. And that can enrich your religious life too. I mean, my appreciation of Jesus Christ went up orders of magnitude after I started meditating, because I had direct experience of who he was, you know, in the sense of what he was trying to do and of the love that he was bringing and everything. And I think that's something magical that, you know, it can get lost in texts and scriptures and lectures and so much when it's not alive. But once it becomes alive, that's something magical.
Absolutely. Does that help, Tom?
Yeah, that's my thoughts exactly on a lot of those. So,
I think I get what you're saying, because it reminded me of when we go to all these, when I was younger, going to all these community, it's the essence of what really is happening is lost because people chit chat. It's a social thing, isn't it? That social thing. So that's what used to put me off. But well, hang on a minute, are we here for that or are we here for that? But anyway, it was a community thing. So it was my internal self-seeking. Aline, what about you?
I think so. One of my closest friends is I want to use the word devout, devout Christian. She's also brought up Korean, so there's a certain difference in the Korean way of approaching Christianity than what we know, like in Europe, for example. And one time she asked me to go to church with her, so that was my first experience with religion, actually, because growing up in India, sure, you have people who practice different religions, but it's quite open. You can do whatever you want. And so I've never actually been to a proper ceremony like that, I guess. And it was really nice. I think because yes, there is this sense of community, like they eat together and then they start mass. And for me, I just immediately went into meditation during it. There was a sermon that was in Korean, so I didn't understand, but there's a certain connection that you feel in places of meditation, of worship, that I think are common to all religions, to all faiths, that you just immediately tap into when you're in that place. And we've had a lot of very deep conversations about faith beliefs, our experiences with all that, which I think I couldn't have with, for example, some of my current friends at business school who have grown up maybe atheists, or who have, I don't know, who don't have this experience with religion. There's a base, a sort of stepping stone that isn't already there, that it actually really helps in the communication of what everyone is experiencing and the sort of deeper connection through the heart. So that's something that I've really appreciated.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I hope that our audience, especially in Europe, are listening to this, because I don't know, the message here today, it's these, remove all these differences, because we are one. And it's easier said than done, but feel with the heart. Feel with the heart when you're sitting next to that person. Guys, we've gone way over the time. It's hitting an hour, and normally we do less, as you know. But any last message, Elizabeth?
No, I'm good.
You're good. I really want to say I appreciate your time, guys, all of you. Is there anything else, Tom or Aline, you would like to add?
No, just thanks for inviting me.
Oh gosh, yeah, yeah, anytime. I hope one day you can visit us at the London Ashram. I was there this morning. Oh, what a feeling. And nothing like Hana, but stepping stones. Come and visit us in London and then go off to Kana. Aline, we've worked quite a lot, so I'm really grateful for your time as well. All the best. And Elizabeth, I'm sending all my love to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Bye.